I never thought a gathering meant for love could unravel the last threads of my dignity. The invitation had arrived 2 months earlier, tucked in a cream-colored envelope with gold-embossed lettering that spelled out names far more refined than mine. It came addressed not to Miss Elena Rae, my actual name, but to Elena Rae, and it was clear from the sloppy handwriting that someone had written it last minute, probably under pressure. I almost threw it out. Almost. But I didn't. Because I'm Elena Rae, 35, single mother of a bright and wild-hearted boy named Micah. And despite everything, the distance, the years of silence, the condescension, I thought maybe my sister's wedding would be a chance. Not a reconciliation, maybe, but a crack in the wall. A moment of recognition. A silent apology dressed in roses and vows. So I said yes. My sister, Clarissa, was getting married at an estate just outside Providence. The kind of venue with sculpted gardens and strings of fairy lights draped across marble columns. It screamed of money and curated happiness. Clarissa had always been the golden one. Flawless, adored, with a laughter that could fill a room and charm anyone within 10 feet. While I, 2 years older, softer around the edges, more practical than polished, was always the one who took a different path. That was their polite way of saying disappointment. I never finished college. Fell in love with a man who left before Micah was born. I worked the front desk at a small law office and tutor high school students in algebra for extra cash. I live in a 2-bedroom duplex where the bathroom fan whines every time you turn on the light, and the heating takes 20 minutes to warm up in winter. But it's home. It's where Micah draws comic book heroes and leaves Legos under the couch cushions. It's where we laugh, cry, and live honestly. The day of the wedding, I woke up early and braided Micah's thick curls while he practiced smiling in the mirror. I'd borrowed a dress from a friend, navy blue, satin, slightly tight at the waist but elegant enough to pass. I wore old heels I'd polished the night before and fixed my makeup under the flickering bathroom light. We took the bus and then a train. Micah held my hand the entire time, excited. He thought this wedding meant we were part of something. We arrived 20 minutes early. The estate was as breathtaking as I'd imagined. White roses everywhere, a live harpist playing something delicate and familiar, and rows of white chairs arranged like a fairy tale dreamscape. Clarissa hadn't changed. She floated down the aisle in an ivory gown that shimmered with every step, her hair a perfect wave of golden silk, her makeup flawless. When she glanced at me, seated in the 3rd row, far enough to be forgettable, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You made it," she said, almost surprised. Then, glancing at Micah, "He's getting big." No hug. No warmth. Just observation. Then she was swept away into a sea of guests who wore suits that fit perfectly and heels that didn't wobble on gravel. Micah tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "she looks like a princess." I smiled at him, even as my heart ached. "She does, doesn't she?" We found our table, table 14, tucked near the back, half hidden behind a pillar and dangerously close to the kitchen door. The place cards were gilded and delicate. Mine had a smudge over the name. I wondered if they had reused an old one or just written it hastily. I told myself it didn't matter. The ceremony went smoothly. Clarissa and her fiancé, Nathan, exchanged heartfelt vows. People dabbed their eyes with linen napkins. Champagne flowed freely, and laughter bubbled through the air like perfume. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to believe I could just be part of the background, unnoticed but unbothered. Micah sat beside me in his little black suit, legs swinging, face lit with wonder. I'd spent 2 paychecks getting that suit, one borrowed, one scraped together, but it was worth it. He looked proud. Belonged. Until he didn't. The first sign came during dinner. A server brought the plates and looked at me, then down at Micah, hesitating. I think kids were supposed to be at the kids' table." I blinked. "He's with me." The server nodded stiffly and moved on. Around us, some guests side-eyed us, not cruelly, but with polite confusion. As though we were the stray puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Clarissa never came to our table. Judith, our mother, barely acknowledged me. When she passed by to greet a group of her high society friends, she offered me a smile so tight it could have snapped. "Oh, Elena," she said, voice light as glass. "Still keeping busy?" Still. That word stung more than I let on. But I stayed. I ate the overpriced salad. I helped Micah with his tie after he got chocolate mousse on it. I answered questions from strangers with polite nods and half-truths. Then the speeches began. Clarissa stood up, radiant, holding a crystal glass. The crowd hushed. I want to thank all of you for being here, she said, voice honeyed. It means the world to celebrate with the people who matter most. I looked at Micah, his face tilted upward in awe. And of course, she continued, her voice lilting, I want to thank someone very special, my big sister. I straightened in my chair, unsure. She's always been an inspiration, Clarissa said. She raised a child on her own. That takes strength. Or stubbornness. Or both. No man stuck around, but hey, she did. Laughter. First a chuckle, then a wave of it, effortless, echoing. A few people turned toward me, smirking. Clarissa smiled wider. She's proof you can be repurposed. The room cracked open in laughter again. And just like that, I was no longer a guest. I was the punchline. My mouth went dry. My face burned. Micah turned to me, brows drawn. Mom. What does that mean? I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was grip the napkin in my lap like a lifeline, praying my hands wouldn't tremble so hard that he'd notice. Judith, seated with the bridal party, laughed the loudest. She's a used car, she said, not bothering to lower her voice. But still runs. Another roar of laughter. The kind that shreds. The kind that stains. I couldn't move. Couldn't run. Because if I did, I'd be confirming everything they believed about me, that I was weak, unwanted, disposable. Micah reached for my hand. And in that moment, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt something else entirely. Something building. Something waiting. The sound of silverware against plates, the glimmer of chandeliers overhead, the soft lilt of string instruments, all of it faded. What remained was the laughter. Clarissa's voice had been clear and charming, as always. Her words had sounded sweet until they weren't. Until they sliced me open in front of 100 well-dressed strangers. But it was the way she smiled, perfect teeth, chin tilted, champagne flute held high, as if she'd just told a witty little anecdote and not belittled me in front of my son, that made something inside me rupture. Micah sat beside me, stunned. His legs stopped swinging. His smile had vanished. Mom, he said in a small voice, why are they laughing at you? I couldn't answer him. My throat had dried like paper. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. They're not, I whispered, though we both knew it was a lie. Around us, glasses clinked. Someone from across the room gave Clarissa a theatrical thumbs up. The DJ, unaware of the mood shift, or maybe used to this kind of thing at upscale events, faded in some soft jazz. The wedding reception continued. But something had broken. Inside me. Inside Micah. And I wasn't sure how to fix it. Judith, our mother, leaned toward one of her friends and said loud enough for half the room to hear, Elena always was the family's cautionary tale. More laughter. Quieter this time, but still present. No one stood up. No one said, that's enough. No one pointed out the cruelty hidden behind the humor. Most people laughed. A few winced. Most looked away. My grandfather stared at the tablecloth. My cousin filmed Clarissa on her phone, probably prepping a reel for Instagram. I felt Micah shrink beside me. And that, more than the insults, more than the stares, more than even the betrayal, was what made me want to scream. This wasn't just my humiliation. They had dragged him into it. My son. The one person I'd worked for, fought for, built a life for. He didn't deserve to sit through this. To have his mother made into a punchline. To watch his own family, his blood, treat her like an afterthought, a stain. I wanted to walk out. Grab his hand, say we're going, and disappear into the night. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, not with fear, but with something harder to name. A deep, hollow ache that had calcified after years of being treated like I didn't belong. Like my life, my choices, my son, were all mistakes to be politely tolerated, or worse, publicly mocked. I stared down at my lap. The napkin I'd been gripping was crumpled in my fist, damp from my palm. I looked around the room for a friendly face. Someone, anyone, who would meet my eyes and say with just a glance, I see you. I know this isn't right. But no one did. They avoided me like I was contagious. Embarrassment personified. Micah nudged me again, whispering, can we go now? My heart cracked. Soon, I said, my voice barely audible. I reached for my water glass just to do something, anything. My fingers were shaking. Then I heard the slow scrape of a chair across the floor. It came from the front. From the head table. I looked up. Nathan, the groom, was standing. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't holding Clarissa's hand. He wasn't even looking at her. He was looking at me. He stood still for a moment, as though testing the room's silence. Every guest turned toward him, a ripple of confusion passing over the crowd. The DJ hesitated with the next track. Even Clarissa blinked, unsure. Nathan stepped forward and reached for the microphone. Clarissa looked alarmed. "What are you?" But he didn't answer her. He held the mic firmly, both hands clenched around it. He didn't look at the crowd. Not at Judith. Not at the whispering tables. Just at me. "Elena," he said, voice steady, not loud, but somehow it filled every corner of the room, "please don't leave." A stunned hush fell over the guests. I froze, halfway between rising and sitting. Michael looked up at me, his eyes wide. Nathan continued. I didn't know what Clarissa planned to say in her speech. We didn't rehearse that part. He turned then, slowly, to face his bride. "You mocked your sister. The woman who showed up here with grace, brought her son, sat in the back, and did nothing but support you." His voice didn't rise, but each word felt like a gavel strike. Clarissa's mouth parted, but nothing came out. "You called her repurposed," Nathan said. "You joked about her being alone. You let your guests laugh at a mother. At a woman who raised a child by herself. A child sitting right there, listening." All eyes turned to Micah. He shrank back into his chair. Nathan's eyes hardened. "I can't stand here and let that be the tone of our wedding. I won't pretend that kind of cruelty is comedy. And if this is what I'm marrying into, if this is how you treat people who show you nothing but love, then I have to reconsider who I'm standing beside." The room gasped. Clarissa's face went pale. "Nathan," Judith began, rising halfway from her chair, "let's not dramatize." "I'm not dramatizing," Nathan cut in, his voice clipped. "I'm drawing a line." He turned again, to the guests now. Some of you laughed. Some of you looked away. But no one stood up. So I will. And then he looked at me again. "Elena," he said softly, "you don't need their approval. You already have something stronger than anyone else in this room, dignity." I sat there stunned. For years, I'd imagined what it would be like to be defended. To be seen. But I never thought it would come from the man marrying my sister. Or rather, almost marrying her. Because then, without another word, Nathan placed the microphone on the table, walked past Clarissa, who stared at him like a glass doll with a cracked face, and exited through the double doors of the reception hall. Not a single person moved. It was like the spell had been broken. Clarissa remained at the head table, trembling. Judith's voice rang out, high and shrill, "How dare he embarrass you like that? That boy is just as ungrateful as your sister." But this time, her voice didn't hold power. It bounced off the walls and fell flat. I stood. Micah stood with me. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. I took his hand, felt the strength of it in mine, and began walking toward the exit. And as we passed through the crowd, through the fairy lights and the scent of roses and the echo of everything unsaid, people parted. Some turned their heads. Some lowered their eyes. But no one stopped us. The moment I crossed the threshold of the reception hall, hand in hand with Micah, I expected someone to call my name. To stop me. To drag me back into that gilded room of smiles and stares and tell me it had all been a joke. But no one did. There was only the soft click of the grand doors closing behind us, followed by the silence of a garden lit with twinkling lights, where laughter had once drifted but now seemed to have vanished. Micah looked up at me as we stepped into the courtyard. "Is the wedding over?" I looked down at him, brushing a curl off his forehead. I think the important part is, we didn't rush. We didn't hide. We walked slowly past the blooming hedges, past the photographers now awkwardly pretending to take candid shots of couples who didn't know where to look, past the valet booth where a young man handed over keys without making eye contact. No one said a word to us. It wasn't until we reached the outer gates that I heard my name. "Elena." I turned. It was Grandpa Martin. He was older now than I remembered, thinner, his cane heavier against the ground. His eyes, usually sharp with sarcasm or softened by whiskey, looked different, damp, distant, like someone trying to recognize a version of the past too far to reach. He approached slowly. "I should have said something sooner," he murmured. I didn't respond at first. Just waited. I watched it happen. "Not just tonight," he continued. "All these years. The way they talked over you. Laughed behind your back. Made you small." He paused, voice shaking. I didn't agree with it. But I didn't stop it, either. Micah stood close to me, holding the edge of my coat now. I looked at my grandfather and nodded, not in forgiveness, not in bitterness. Just understanding. Some silences aren't chosen. They're inherited. Generational. Conditioned. You still have time, I said softly. To speak differently. To be different. He gave me a small, sad smile and stepped back into the shadows. Micah and I left the estate with no fanfare. We didn't wait for a ride. We walked down the long gravel path to the road and waited for the next bus. I pulled off my heels, carrying them in one hand while Micah skipped over cracks in the pavement with his sneakers. The air was crisp, quiet. It was the first time I'd exhaled fully that day. We rode home in silence, no music, no phone distractions. Just the gentle rhythm of tires on asphalt and Micah's fingers tracing invisible shapes on the fogged-up window. Back home, the apartment greeted us with its usual imperfections, a crooked welcome mat, the faint buzz of the fridge, the warmth of something real and lived in. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and watched Micah kick off his shoes like nothing had happened. I stood in the middle of our small living room and let the silence settle. Something inside me had shifted. Something irreversible. That night, after Micah had changed into his pajamas and brushed his teeth, I tucked him into bed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. But when I bent to kiss his forehead, he whispered, "You didn't cry, Mom. You didn't get mad. You just walked." I paused. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? He thought for a moment. It was like you were a superhero. I laughed, quiet and tight in the chest, but real. I didn't feel like one. But you were, he said. I stood by his door a little longer than usual that night, watching him drift off. And when I finally returned to the kitchen, I saw my phone blinking. Missed calls. Messages. Dozens. I hesitated before unlocking the screen. They weren't from family. They were from strangers. A friend of a friend had posted a video, Nathan's speech. Somehow, someone had recorded the whole thing, the moment he stood up, the words he spoke, the silence that followed. By the time I clicked on the link, the video had already reached 20,000 views. I watched it once. Then again. Then a third time, not because I needed validation, but because I needed to believe it had really happened. That someone had stood in a room full of polished cruelty and said no more. The comments flooded in. "This man's a legend. Protect him at all costs." To the woman in the back with the boy, "You are everything." As a single mom, this hit me hard. Thank you for sharing. Sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms. It comes in microphones. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat still for a long time, letting go of something I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The next day, Clarissa posted nothing. No Instagram recap. No wedding photos. No witty captions or diamond ring selfies. Just silence. A week later, their engagement was officially called off. No announcement. No apology. Just deletion. Judith called once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Elena, I hope you're proud. You embarrassed the family. You made a scene." I played the message twice. Then deleted it. Micah asked me why I was smiling. I told him I wasn't sure. But I was. A few days after that, a bouquet arrived at my apartment. Wildflowers. Not roses. No name on the card, just 5 words handwritten in tight cursive. To the woman who walked. It wasn't just a bouquet. It was a turning point. For once, I hadn't begged for love. I hadn't explained myself. I hadn't made myself smaller so someone else could feel dull. I had walked. Not to prove anything. Not to win anything. But because I finally realized, I didn't need to stay in rooms that required me to shrink. The next morning, the apartment was quiet except for the steady hum of the kettle and the light footsteps of Micah padding into the kitchen in his mismatched socks. He yawned, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is it Saturday?" he mumbled. "Yep," I said, pouring water into a chipped mug. "Which means pancakes." His face lit up, and just like that, the heaviness of the night before seemed to slide off his little shoulders, at least for the moment. Kids are like that, resilient in ways adults forget how to be. But I knew better than to think he had forgotten. It had imprinted itself in his wide eyes and the way he clung to my hand as we walked out of that room. I flipped pancakes while he sat at the table doodling superheroes in a spiral notebook, narrating a new story where the quiet mom with laser eyes saved a planet from people who laughed at others. I didn't ask if she was supposed to be me. I already knew. When he asked if he could wear his suit again to school on Monday just because, I said yes. Later that day, the video hit 100,000 views. People began tagging me in it, even though I'd never posted it, never said a word online. Friends from years ago, high school classmates, old coworkers, even a former barista I'd once tipped well, started messaging me. They didn't all know the details. They didn't need to. What they saw was enough. The woman sitting quietly in the back of a fancy wedding. The child beside her. The cruelty dressed up as humor. And the man, Nathan, who stood up not for attention, but because silence had gone too far. They called it brave. They called it justice. They called it the best unscripted moment of the year. But no one was talking about Clarissa. Not in the way she was used to. There were no glamorous wedding photos. No Pinterest-worthy table spreads or captions about best day ever. The bridal hashtag she had tried so hard to brand, hashtag Nathan Riz Say Yes, was hijacked by clips of the speech and memes of Nathan dropping the mic. Clarissa deleted her Instagram within 48 hours. A mutual friend mentioned she was laying low at a friend's summer house and felt completely betrayed. But there were no statements. No apologies. Just silence, again. Only this time, the silence wasn't mine. Judith, our mother, called once more. This time, I answered. She didn't say hello. You should have laughed, she said, her voice sharp and brittle like a glass trying not to shatter. It was a joke. You embarrassed the entire family by making it into something it wasn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let her finish. Then I said, I'm not your scapegoat anymore. And I hung up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. Sharp. Final. And it felt like air rushing into lungs that had been underwater for years. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Not to her. Not to Clarissa. Not to anyone who ever made me feel like I had to apologize for surviving with grace. Micah and I kept living. I still worked at the law office by day, tutoring high schoolers in the evenings. The heater still took too long to warm up. The fridge still buzzed. I still made 2 different dinners on the nights Micah wanted dinosaur-shaped nuggets and I wanted something with kale. But everything felt a little lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I walked taller. I didn't enter rooms hoping to be invisible anymore. I didn't downplay my story or soften my strength to make others more comfortable. Micah changed too. He asked more questions now. Smart ones. Big ones. Why do people laugh when someone is hurting? Why didn't Aunt Clarissa say sorry? Do you think Nathan is a superhero? And sometimes, the questions were softer. Do you think I'll be brave like him when I grow up? I told him he already was. Because he didn't cry at the wedding, not because he wasn't hurt, but because he was watching. Processing. Learning. And what he saw was a lesson no book could teach. He saw what it looked like to sit through cruelty with your head held high. To leave a room that doesn't respect you. To walk away, not with revenge, but with dignity. And most importantly, he saw that sometimes the heroes aren't the ones at the center of the spotlight, but the ones who speak when the room goes quiet. A week later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a paperback novel and a simple card that read, "For the woman who didn't need to shout to be heard." I smiled. I didn't need to know who sent it. I already knew. The wedding never made it into any magazines. Clarissa and Nathan officially canceled the marriage quietly. No public announcements. No press release. No angry social media tirades. Just a ripple that faded out behind closed curtains. Clarissa didn't reach out to me again. I didn't expect her to. Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. Some doors stay shut for good. And that's okay. Because not every story ends with reconciliation. Some end with release. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for redemption. I already had everything I needed. And most of all, I had Micah, who now stood in front of the bathroom mirror at night brushing his teeth, pausing only to ask, "Mom, are you still sad about what happened?" I thought for a moment. Not really. Why? He shrugged, foam at the corners of his mouth. Because I think you won even though it wasn't a fight. I stared at our reflection, me in my oversized hoodie, him in his cartoon pajamas, and realized that this right here was the ending I'd been waiting for. Not applause. Not vindication. But clarity. 6 months had passed. 6 months since the night the wedding never happened. Since Clarissa stood at the center of her picture-perfect reception and watched the man she was supposed to marry walk out the door in front of everyone. Since I walked out with my son, not in shame, but with my head held higher than I ever had. The world didn't collapse. In fact, it kept spinning. Just quieter now. There were no family reunions, no awkward let's talk texts from Clarissa, no dramatic public explanations. Judith didn't invite me over for tea or offer a weepy apology. The people who once hovered around my sister's orbit slowly stopped asking questions. But something else happened. Micah grew. Not just taller, though his jeans had started creeping above his ankles again, but wiser. Calmer. More observant. He'd always been curious, but now he asked questions that lingered in the air long after he spoke them. "Mom," he asked one night while watching a cartoon hero save the day, "do you think being strong means fighting back?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. When not to become who they expect you to be." He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened a drawer where I'd tucked away the card from the bouquet, to the woman who walked. I didn't need a name. The meaning was enough. That 5-word message had become something of a mantra. Because I hadn't just walked away from a wedding. I had walked away from a lifetime of shrinking. From every family dinner where my voice was talked over. Every comment about my parenting, my weight, my choices. Every backhanded compliment. Every silence that followed the moments I needed someone to say, "You're enough." I hadn't needed to make a scene to make a point. That was the part no one had expected. I didn't yell, throw a drink, or storm out with righteous fury. I stood up, took Micah's hand, and left with grace. And someone, Nathan, had stood up not for attention, but because someone had to. He reminded that entire room what love looks like. Not the love dressed in white gowns and floral arches. Not the love toasted with champagne and rehearsed vows. But the kind of love that says, "I see you. You matter. This isn't okay." That kind of love isn't glamorous. It doesn't trend. But it's the kind that changes people. It changed me. Not overnight. Not in some fairy tale way. But slowly. Subtly. I started to speak up more at work. Not aggressively, just with more certainty. I stopped apologizing for leaving early to pick up Micah. I stopped explaining why I couldn't just get a sitter. I started saying no without guilt. And I stopped waiting. Waiting for someone to clap for me. Waiting for someone to tell me I was doing enough. Waiting for people who had made it clear they'd only see me through the lens of my failures. I began celebrating myself. Quietly. Honestly. When Micah got a perfect score on his spelling test, we had ice cream for dinner. When I fixed the leaky kitchen sink by watching a YouTube video and wrestling with rusted bolts for 2 hours, I wrote it down in a notebook titled "Things I Did Without Anyone's Help." There were more entries than I expected. I made new friends, slowly. Other single moms at Micah's school. A neighbor who ran a small bookstore and always saved the newest releases for me. A barista who remembered my name and made a heart in my latte foam even when I looked tired and worn. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't have to. What they knew was enough. One afternoon, Micah came home from school with a class project, a diorama. Inside was a paper figurine of the woman standing on a cardboard stage. "This is you," he said proudly. "It's called When the Quiet Hero Walks Away." I nearly cried right there in the kitchen. "That's me?" I asked, brushing his hair off his forehead. "Yeah," he said. "Because heroes don't always fight. Sometimes they just know when to leave." I hugged him so tightly that night, he giggled and pretended I was a boa constrictor. We both laughed until we cried. Clarissa never reached out. I think part of me always wondered if she would. If she'd show up one day with a stiff apology and a bottle of wine. If she'd admit it was wrong, that what she said had less to do with me and more to do with her own insecurities. But she didn't. And that, I realized, was its own answer. Judith did call once more, months later. This time, I let her speak. "I just don't understand why you had to make a scene," she said. "I didn't make a scene," I told her, calmly. "I walked away from one. Then I hung up again. Not out of spite. Out of peace." It's strange, isn't it? How a single night, a single speech, a single decision, can shift the axis of your life just enough that everything starts to tilt toward clarity. I wasn't someone's cautionary tale anymore. I wasn't the sister who messed up. I was Elena Rae. Mother. Writer. Quiet warrior. And Micah? He started writing little comic books, stories about a boy and his superhero mom who doesn't wear a cape but always knows when to stand up and when to walk away. One day, he asked if he could print them out and give them to his friends. "Of course," I said. "But why?" He shrugged. "Because some of them need to know it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to walk away. That's when I knew. He hadn't just survived that night with me. He had learned from it. And he would carry that truth forward. No, I didn't get a dance under fairy lights. I didn't toss a bouquet or give a tearful toast. But I walked out with something far greater than approval. I walked out with my son beside me. My dignity intact. And the quiet, powerful certainty that I don't need to explain my worth to anyone. That is the ending no one expected. And exactly the one I deserved.